guess before I start the PowerPoint, I'll just talk quickly about myself. I'm an associate professor at the University of the West of England in Bristol. And what I'm going to be presenting to you today is some research that we did between the months of April and December 2020 in the Southwest region of the United Kingdom. And what we did was we wanted to look at what made up some resilience or adaptability within the creative industries in the Southwest of England. As you can imagine, the pandemic, the COVID-19 pandemic, has had a devastating effect on the creative industries in the United Kingdom. And many of the subsectors have been negatively affected, especially those subsectors that rely on physical presence or live audiences, if that makes any sense. So let me talk about this and let me show you the PowerPoint. Can the support team put up the PowerPoint, please? Or share the PowerPoint? Yeah, that's it, great. Right, so this was the name of the project that we did. It was called From Catastrophe to Opportunity, Unpacking the Impact of COVID-19 on the Creative Industries in Southwest England. Next slide, please. This slide shows you the projected damage that many of the subsectors in the creative industries in the United Kingdom have suffered. And if you look at this table, you'll see that there's two aspects that are really important. You've got revenue lost, so how much money is projected to have been lost, and then you've got jobs lost. And if you look at the jobs lost column, right, you'll see that theater, the subsector of theater, has lost close to 200,000 jobs. So again, and that's the most projected job losses within the creative sector in the United Kingdom would be around the theater sector. When it comes to the money and revenues lost, if you look at the second column where it says revenue lost, you'll see that the sector that lost the most, I guess projected to lose the most, was film, TV, video, radio, and photography. And then after that comes advertising and marketing and market research. And then after that comes music, performing, and visual arts. Okay, so the sector has really, really been devastated, just as many other sectors have in the United Kingdom. The pandemic has had a sweeping effect on the creative industry specifically. So if we go to the next slide, please. Thanks. These were the questions that we were asking in the research. Okay, so we used surveys, interviews, and case studies, and we wanted to ask specific questions about the Southwest. Okay, and like I said, this was between April and December 2020. Now, out of all those questions, the most important was the third one, and it's what I'm going to talk about today. So how can the sector as a whole be made more adaptable and or resilient? So we're talking about this idea of resilience and adaptability. Next slide, please. Okay, and these were some of the results that came out of the research from the survey. And what you'll see here is that we've got this table. 22% of organizations that were surveyed, all right, either remained stable or, were projecting, remained stable, right, or had a projected increase in their annual turnover. So that means they were going to either make more money as a result of the pandemic, or they weren't being affected by the pandemic at all. Okay, and as you can see from the table as well, 88% of the organizations that we surveyed, of course, have had a decrease in turnover and projected turnover, and that's the same across the board, right? So we're seeing that the majority of creative industries are going to see a decrease in turnover. But what we wanted to focus on was that 22% at the top, that increase in projected turnover for those specific organizations. Okay, and so that's what I'm going to be talking about in this presentation. Can we go to the next slide, please? Again, so this is another question, and we asked a question about their productivity levels, right? So how productive are creative organizations from the time span that we allocated for the survey? We found that 26%, 26 to 27% of organizations who answered the survey were actually more productive than before the pandemic, or continue to produce as prior to the outbreak. So in other words, they were either not affected, so 26% were either not affected, and so everything was the same, or they became even more productive. Now, these were the two, what we call dependent variables in our survey, those two questions that I've just showed you, those two results. And it was on the back of those that we decided, okay, so what is going on in the creative industries in the Southwest, right? Where we've got 27% of organizations that are actually doing well or doing okay out of it, and actually have a projected increase in turnover. And what we did was, we looked into that 26%, that 27%, and a number of characteristics started to come to the fore, right, when we did our analysis. Now, I just want to pause there for a second, because the report for this research is still being written, okay? So what I'm presenting to you are findings that are sort of preliminary, and they're yet to be substantiated, okay? So these are the initial findings coming out of the research. The final report will be finished by the middle of April, and by the end of April, there should be a draft of this report. So if anybody wants to read the report, which will be a much more fine-grained analysis of the research, please get in contact with me, or get in contact with me through the British Council, or email me if that's all right. Okay, that's fine. It'll be a free report, so anybody can have it. Nobody has to pay for it or anything like that. Okay, so let's go back to the findings. We found that 27% of organizations were either not affected, or indeed became busier with an increase in projected turnover as a result of the pandemic. Okay, and then we looked at those 27% and we decided, what are the characteristics of these organizations? What is it about them that potentially makes them either busier, right, or not being affected by the pandemic? Next slide, please. Okay, and so a number of things started to come to the fore. Okay, of the 22 to 26% of organizations which have increased turnover, remained stable, have become more productive, right, or where their productivity has not been affected, there was like I said, there were potentially around 9 characteristics. Okay. And the first characteristic that came out was size. Okay, so size of organization. What we found was that actually a large proportion of these organizations had between 1 and 10 employees. Most of them actually had about 2 or 3 employees. Now, that doesn't mean that if you are a large organization that you wouldn't be able to survive the pandemic. That's not what we're saying here. Okay, what we're saying here is, what we've seen is that there's something about the way small organizations potentially navigate their business model that allows them to be more agile, at least more nimble, and respond quicker, okay, to things like a pandemic, when a pandemic hits. And which makes complete sense. So if you only have 2 employees, as opposed to having 30 or 40 employees, if you want to adapt any changes to your organization, it's going to be able to be quicker than if you had, 30 or 40 employees. So that sort of made sense to us. Okay. But of course, now this is just coming out of the initial analysis. Whether or not size of organization actually correlates with being more productive or having an increased turnover is yet to be seen, and that will come out in the final report. These are the first indications. So there is something about size, but the correlation hasn't been substantiated yet, okay? All right, the next thing, which was very clear, and I think a lot of you will see this, okay, is the importance of having an online business model, right? So many organizations generate their income of those organizations, the 20 to 22 to 26%, generate income through an online business model. And the income that they generate is either a partial income, so let's say 15 to 30%, or a substantial income, which is 50% or more. All right, regardless, online business models have become really important to the creative and cultural sector. And this is more problematic for organizations that have not had the opportunity to develop an online business model prior to the pandemic. What we're seeing here is there are some organizations that have been able, that were testing having an online business model before the pandemic actually hit, right? So there's something about already dipping your sort of, dipping your toes in the water, if that makes any sense, around online, digital, cultural and creative offers. But like I said, this was much more difficult for organizations that are reliant on audiences, physical audiences, right? Or reliant on the physical presence of a customer base. But I'll go through a case study around that, okay, to show you what they did later on in the presentation. The next thing was pivoting. That was a really important characteristic. So many of the organizations were able to pivot to their online delivery to generate partial or substantial income, and they were able to do it quickly. So pivoting basically means that you're doing one thing, but then you were able to turn around and respond to the pandemic by doing something else, and that something else was online and digital. So it is connected to this idea of an online business model, okay? But what those online business models are specifically are completely contingent. They depend on the type of organization that you are, the type of creative and cultural organization that you are, and what type of creative and cultural offer that you have that could be turned into a digital asset, okay? So pivoting was really important. And the thing about pivoting that was important was timing, okay? So they were able to do it quickly. When the pandemic hit and when the first lockdown happened in March last year, I can't believe it's been 1 year, but it was March 23rd, that's fine, Nazgul. So March 23rd, that's fine. Last year, 2020, was when the first lockdown happened. It took some of these organizations a couple of months to try and get themselves back on their feet. And of course, the government had to respond as well, which I'll talk about in a second, okay? But this ability to pivot, this quickness, was important. At least, you know, having a contingency plan. So I think as we go forward as a sector, the creative and cultural sector, and this is globally as well, the idea of having a contingency plan for your business or for your organization is going to have to be a priority. It's going to have to be a two-pronged process. You've got your creative and cultural offer, whatever that is, but then you've got your ability to pivot, or at least your online creative and cultural offer, if that makes any sense. And if you have an online creative and cultural offer, then you also want to be able to pivot. How can you make that more resilient as well, okay? All right, the fourth characteristic that we found was diversity, okay, within the organization. So what we found here was, again, these haven't been fully substantiated yet with statistical analysis, okay? But what we found here was that certain organizations seemed to fare a little bit better, slightly, ever so slightly better, right, than others, and that depended on how diverse the organization was, okay? Now, the thing about diversity and what's contentious about this is that in the creative industries and the cultural industries, and I'm sure many of you know this, you know, if you have a team of 3 people, okay, you know, how diverse that team is potentially will not have a that huge an impact on, you know, on the sort of the resilience aspect of your organization, okay? This is more about diversity within the sector as a whole, all right, and how healthy the sector is, if that makes any sense. So we're talking about in this kind of, I guess, this respect, there is this aspect of having the sector be more diverse, which of course allows for more idea generation and more, you know, sort of connections with populations that are, you know, that are ethnically, culturally, socially diverse as well. Okay, so there is something about diversity, but it hasn't been 100% substantiated yet. Okay. Can we get to the next slide, please? All right, the other thing was collaboration with other sectors. Okay, so this means collaborating not just within the arts and cultural sector itself or the creative industry sector, but going out there and whether it's doing work with the education sector, which was actually a really big one, doing work with the health sector, which is another big one as well. Okay, which is another big finding. So being able to branch out of just the creative and cultural sector and having connections with other sectors seemed to give you a slight advantage as well. Okay. So the next one was engaging with support and anchor organizations. What this means is that a number of the creative industries organizations had connections within their networks to what we call anchor organizations. And these can be anything from studio support providers, creative hubs, right? Business support organizations, training programs. I would say even local government, local funding initiatives, the private sector as well, potential connections with the private sector as well. Okay, this is as you think about it in a more global context. So engaging with support organizations gives creative and cultural businesses or organizations a bit of a slight advantage as well. Again, that depends though on your subsector. Okay. The next thing was subsector. Okay, so what subsector you were in dictated, how well you were doing, basically, because as a result of the pandemic. It says here that advertising and marketing, animation, audio and radio, games and visual arts seem to fare better. Okay, whereas theater, music production, music venue management were hit very hard. Okay, now the way to think about this is, and the way we've divided it up in the report is that there are 3 types of subsector. You're either a purely digital subsector, and that could be animation, virtual effects, a gaming company, okay, whatever it is. Hybrid organization, and a lot of creative hubs and cultural hubs and see themselves as hybrid organizations, where you have a digital offer, but you also have a physical, non-digital offer, more traditional offer. And then you have a non-digital subsector. So you've got purely digital, hybrid, and non-digital. And non-digital would be organizations that are, more reliant on physical presence, the reliance on audiences as well, right? Or physical audiences as well. And you'll see this divide. This divide came out quite stark again in the research. And again, it's pointing to this digital, the importance of having a digital thumbprint, or at least a digital characteristic to your business or your organization. I'm going to skip government support because I want to talk about that a little bit more. I'm going to go to location quickly first, and then I will come back to government support. Okay. Another thing that was important was location. So the bigger cities where organizations clustered seemed to have a better chance, right, than organizations that were further away and potentially more rural areas. There's something about the energy, and the being close to the physical ecosystem. In Bristol, in this case, was by far, had the highest concentration of these organizations. But there's a reason for that, and it connects to, support, being part of the support ecosystem and the ecology that you're there. So you want to be part of that scene or that ecosystem. Okay, it's really important for the longevity of the organization. All right, so let me talk about government support. In the UK, what happened was that the government quickly galvanized a number of different schemes in order to help the economy in the country. Okay, so, and this basically revolves around a number of different types of support systems and funding and financing options for a number of different types of organization. Okay, so if you were a small business, you were able to do what's called the furlough scheme. And in the furlough scheme, basically the government pays the salary of your employees for as long as they can. And that comes up to, I think it's about £2,500 a month is what the furlough scheme was paying people. So the furlough scheme ended up being a lifeline to many creative and cultural organizations. And actually, many of them are still receiving checks from the furlough scheme. Now, the furlough scheme will end in September 2021. What happens then is yet to be seen. And hopefully, we'll see that as the economy begins to rebound and as the economy begins to recover, and as organizations start to see what they, or utilize what they believe is changes that will make their organizations more resilient, then they will start to reduce the furlough scheme, right, in order to taper off the support. That's what I hope that they do. I hope it's not a cliff edge where they basically just stop the furlough scheme right away. Anyways, that has been a huge lifeline for the creative and cultural sector. And there's been a number of other support, government support initiatives that have been really important as well, okay? So there's something about government support that's really important. The other aspect that's really important is what we call R&D, research and development. So again, if you're a business in the UK, if you're an organization in the UK, you're able to access, you can apply for funding in order to investigate and do research with respect to your organization. And this was a really important, another lifeline for organizations in order to help them pivot, or at least think about, at least test the waters of what it might mean to have a digital offer. It gave them the space, the time and the space with money, basically saying, look, here's the time and the space, along with the furlough scheme, okay, to develop ideas that might be able to take your organization from the train track that you're on now to a more resilient and adaptable train track, okay? That breathing room was really important, okay? And it was something that the government in this country did right, I think, okay? So can we go to the next slide, please? All right, so these were some of the themes that came out of the research. Okay, so those, what I just shared with you, were the sort of 9 characteristics that we're still substantiating in the report. And if you are, like I said, if you are interested in the report, I believe that the team has shared my email on this. So please do email me and I will send that report to you. It'll be in English, okay, but you'll be able to translate it, I think, but it will be in English, hopefully by the end of April, okay? All right, so here were some of the themes that came out of the interviews that we did with these organizations, all right? And the first question we asked was, how are you operating in the current climate? And I sort of did a little bit of some examples of different types of organizations. I haven't given you their names, I've anonymized them, but these answers were from, this is from a media company, a music industry consultant, an arts and cultural center, a freelance artist, a robotics and visual art company, a museum, and some market organizers. Okay, and you'll see, so we asked them, how are you operating in the current climate? And the first response from the market organizers was, they were able to pivot to online digital sales. However, their operating costs were 50% and their income was only 7%. Okay, so an example of potential pivoting that didn't help, but again, pivoting is something that is long-term. The media company said they had to postpone several event-type projects, including their podcast festival. So they had a podcast festival focusing on mentoring and large Innovate UK Digital Commission. And that's what I was talking about when I mean research and development funding. So what they did was they received £100,000 from Innovate UK, which is the organization that funds research and development for all sorts of different science and non-science sectors. They were able to use that money to think about their pivoting, right? The music industry consultant said they had to cancel events and they focused on online delivery of tours. They had to rebuild their website and they commissioned work, papers, talks, and workshops. They also did software training supported by specific schemes. Okay, the Cultural and Arts Center said that they had to move all possible activity online. Okay, that's all they said. The freelance artist said that he or she had to diversify their income streams and again, move to a digital delivery. The robotics and visual art company said that early stage, very agile startup working on R&D, right, for a product supported by a publicly funded program, helped them. So again, they were doing R&D, and now they're considering the festival market and pivoting towards academia, because there's a lot of research in this area. So again, so for them, they're basically trying to diversify their offer towards universities. For the museum, they had to, this is very physical, they had to open less hours, they had to reduce their audience capacity, and they tried to take events online. Okay, so this was in the immediate aftermath. Can we go to the next slide, please? So what do you think are some of the reasons you have survived the crisis? Okay, so this was, apologies for the scrambling up there. But basically what happened was, again, it's the similar group of respondents, okay? And this is how this is some of the reasons why they survived the crisis, according to them, coming from the interviews. And the market organizers said that it was the furlough scheme, business rate rebate, and the fact that they were a small organization that helped them. Okay, so again, it was a combination of things. Government support and size of organization seemed to help them, right, in connection. And maybe I should have said this earlier, those 9 characteristics that I shared with you, most of them were in, sort of in congruence with each other. In other words, none of them were sort of like just separated out. So many organizations had multiple of those types of characteristics. The media company said that, again, the Innovate UK Commission was really helpful, and the fact that they were a small, agile company. The music industry consultant said that their ability to work online helped them survive, their own personal support network, pitching for business in the summer, and getting a bit of a training budget together, right, through some public funding as well, was really important. The Arts Center said that they had low overheads. Okay, so, and they had sold only assets, I guess, that was theirs. I'll skip some, I don't want to go through all of these because there's a lot there. The robotics and the visual arts organization was interesting. They said that they were in a favorable financial position when it hit. So they had reserves from charitable grants, right, from and some funding from Arts Council England. And they stopped paying business rates because the government said that they could suspend business rates. And they had to diversify their income streams as well. So they included having memberships, shops, events, and investment income, financial support from the local council and local government, right? And creating partnerships. So what you're seeing here, I guess the flavor that you're seeing here, is that many of these organizations were scrambling to figure out how to do things in order to survive the crisis. And because of that, they were forced to do a number of different things. All those things put together sort of culminated in a type of resilience, if that makes any sense. The next slide, please. So the question was, how easy was it for you to pivot to online delivery? And what does pivoting look like for you, right? And the media company said it was easy for them, obviously, to pivot mentoring online. Because what they did was they started to go into a mentoring type of engagement with their customers. Again, the Innovate UK funding was really important for them, okay, to figure that out. The market organizers said that they created what was called a digital market directory, and it was not very successful financially or experientially, right, compared to the non-digital model. So again, for the physical organizations that were not able to pivot online, in a way that was effective, really affected them negatively. The music industry consultant said that, they had to update their website. They started to do talks, training and research, online touring events. So again, a bit of a scramble to try and figure out what are my transferable skills that I can use in order to keep my consultancy going. The Arts Center said it was already marketing online, but it added some marketing talks, right? And they had to do some online workshops and coaching. Okay, but the Arts Center, what was different for them is that they received public funds from the government. So in the creative industries in the UK, you've got 2 types of organizations. You're in the arts and cultural sector, and you receive funding from the government, right, to do that. So you have a project that you receive funding to deliver, and at the end of the project, you do what's called an evaluation, and then you basically say, all right, how did the project fare? Or you're a private organization that depends on trading. okay? And in that case, those organizations, the ones that depended on trading, were a lot more affected than the ones that depend on public funding. Freelance artists said that it was easy for them because they did Zoom meetings, right? And everything was sort of online again with trying to do basically conferences and trying to connect to a larger network in order to think about what would happen after the pandemic was over. So again, thinking in the future, but very early stages, so not affected delivery yet. And then the robotics, the robotics and visual art company were talking about, they were already online, and all of their event activity moved to online and invested in Zoom software. So they basically had a small investment in software, and they moved this stuff online. Okay, a couple more slides left. Do I have enough time? Nazgul, am I okay for time? No answer? Okay, let's go to the next slide. So this was an example of a theater. Okay, so this place is called the Egg Theatre, and it's in Bath, UK. Okay, and they were able to, again, what was important about them is obviously they have to suspend what they do. They have to suspend the shows that they put on, right? Because they're a theater. And what they do is they focus on, before the pandemic, there was a big focus on training young theater, I guess children and young people that were interested in theater or in the theater sector. Okay, so they already had training as part of what it is that they were doing. The Egg Theatre is connected to the Royal Theatre in Bath, right? So there is a larger theatre that's connected to it, which means, which is really important, that there's a pipeline going from a small theatre that works with young people towards the larger theatre that sort of brings in larger crowds and is for adults, I guess, right? What they did was they pivoted their online training. Sorry, they pivoted their training for young theater goers online. All right, so which was of course very difficult to do, but they were able to do it, and it really helped them at least keep the organization going. Now they're not pulling in, the crowds and the sort of revenue that they would have been doing if there wasn't a pandemic. But what they did by doing this online pivot was able to keep the organization alive, keep it breathing, right? Which is important for the arts, like I was saying, the arts and cultural sector. So the Egg Theatre receives public funds in order to keep it going, right? But you need more than just public funds, and you can't just go dark, because if you go dark, you turn the lights off, then you don't know if you're going to be coming back to the same thing if we get to the point where the lights can be turned back on. All right. So what was really important about the Egg Theatre, though, was that they were able to receive that research and development money, that R&D money, that helped them. Okay, now that helped them sort of think about how they could think through pivoting and delivering their cultural offer. Okay, let's go to the next slide. So this is the last slide, and it's about a company called Gritty Pearl Productions that were from Bristol as well. And they kind of struggled. Okay, so they're kind of a brand new Bristol-based micro SME, and they operate as an inclusive media production house, right? An industry training organization. And their aim is to close the diversity gaps in the media production talent pipeline, right? And what they do is they try to nurture, again, young creatives through their content creation. As a result of the pandemic, they had to postpone several live events, right? Including the delivery of their TED Talks, right? The TEDx Talks in Bristol in 2020, as well as they had to stop producing an inaugural Bristol-based podcast festival, okay? So they had to cancel all that. They pivoted their current mentoring program to online delivery. So what they did was, they said, all right, so we're already mentoring, but we need to now mentor online. And the main adaptation has been possible, again, I had to point this out, through a successful bid to the Innovate UK Crisis Fund, which is an R&D fund, all right? And it enabled the company to pivot activity to building a platform, okay, and online agency for diverse talent development and networking. And that was the core of what they did, right? So instead of just being a talent development network, they created an agency. They were able to expand and amplify what it is that they actually did. The founder described it as an end-to-end solution where you can do all of your talent discovery in one place on an app, right? To create a number of different things. All right. Gritty Pearl has been a real success story for Bristol. And I think I'm out of time, guys. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to stop here, and I guess we'll take any questions.